Hey guys, today we're going to be learning about the separation of power and specifically checks and balances between the three branches of government: legislative, executive, and judicial. So separating power among the legislative, executive, and judicial branches helps prevent any one branch from abusing power. It's a theme we keep coming back to. Our founding fathers really did not want any part of the government to be too powerful. They had come from that in England, and they were really, really afraid of any part of our government getting too much power and then abusing that power, making a corrupt system, which makes it very difficult for people to believe in the government, which is important in a democracy. So they were really careful and had a great design of how to have these checks and balances. So first we're going to talk about the National Legislative Branch, or Congress, and the powers that legislative branch has over the executive branch. So we know that the main function of the legislative branch is to make the laws, and the main function of the executive branch is to carry out the laws, but they do a lot more things than that. So one thing that the legislative branch can do to check the executive branch is to override presidential vetoes. Last step in the lawmaking process is that the president decides to sign a bill into a law, thus putting it into effect, or the president can veto a law and say no to it. But the founding fathers wanted to make sure that Congress would have a way to override that or to stop that if the president didn't have a good reason for saying no. So with 2/3 of vote, Congress can still pass a bill into a law even if the president doesn't sign it. That's one of their checks on the president. Another one is that they can impeach and convict a president. So we know from a recent example that in the House of Representatives that they voted to impeach President Trump on abuse of power and obstructing Congress. But then the Senate did not convict him. The Senate had to vote to convict him, and then he would have been removed from office. But the Senate decided that not to go forward with that. But that is a check that the legislative branch has on the president. And then the legislative branch also has checks over the judicial branch. And the main function of the judicial branch is to interpret the laws. And here are the checks. So the legislative branch can confirm or refuse to confirm federal judges or justices. So we know the president appoints someone. So here's Sandra Day O'Connor, who was appointed by President Reagan. But then the Senate had to vote of whether or not they thought she was qualified and whether or not she would do what was best for the country in an impartial manner. And they did vote to put her on the bench. They also can impeach and convict a federal judge. So if somebody on the Supreme Court or any of the other federal courts was breaking the law or doing other things that were improper for a judge, they would go through the same process we just saw. The House of Representatives could bring formal charges and vote on those, and then the Senate would convict them, and they would be removed from the bench. Then we're going to look at the executive branch. And the executive branch has powers over the legislative branch and can check their powers. So the president can veto a law passed and acts of Congress. So if the president thinks that Congress is passing a law that isn't right for the country, he can say no and veto it, and that checks their power so that Congress can't just make all kinds of crazy bills and laws. They can also convene a special session of Congress. So that happens a lot with budget negotiations. If Congress tries to, go home for a session, the people in Congress go back to their districts at times to make sure that they know what the people in their district want and need so they can represent them accurately in Congress. But sometimes the president will say, nope, you can't go home. You've got to stay here and finish on the budget. And so he can kind of force them to stay in session, which is a check on their power. The executive branch over the judicial branch, so the president over the judicial branch, is the president's the one who nominates federal judges. So that's a big power. He gets to pick who is on the bench to begin with. And also the president can pardon, commute a sentence, or rescind a fine for people convicted of a crime. So if the president feels as though somebody was put into jail unjustly, and there wasn't enough evidence or something like that, then they can pardon them, which means it was like they never committed the crime. They can commute a sentence, which might mean that they make it so the person's in jail for less time or something like that. or rescind a fine, meaning that they can pay back the fine. The judicial branch has powers over both branches, and over the legislative branch, they can declare laws unconstitutional. So their main job is to look at the U.S. Constitution and kind of say, like, does this go with the Constitution or does it go against the Constitution? And if it's unconstitutional, then they take it away. It's not a law anymore. And the judicial branch over the executive branch is that they can declare executive acts unconstitutional. So a famous one of this is also with Trump's first travel ban. It was based on people's religion, and the court said that Trump was not able to do that because that was a violation of First Amendment rights. So they had to take away that executive act of banning people from Muslim countries coming to the U.S. So basically, the power of the courts is the same for both of them, in that they can say something's unconstitutional, and it's their only check, really. But it's a really, really important one, and it's a really, really powerful one, because in a democracy, we're ruled by the laws, not by people, and the supreme law of the land is the Constitution, and they can say it doesn't go with that, and it goes away. So what's important to understand about this? You have these questions. In front of you, so a system of checks and balances gives each of the three branches of government ways to limit the powers of the other branches. The most significant example of limited government. Thank you so much for listening, and go ahead and answer the questions that you were given, and thanks again.